I picked up this Rockshox Judy fork to go on my giant Talon. It is used and it probably needs a full lower leg service, but before I get into that, I want to show you guys a pretty quick and easy way to increase the travel on one of these forks. So I purchased this fork used probably about a year or so ago, and it's been sitting in my garage just collecting dust since then. I'm finally getting ready to put it on the giant Talon, and I do want to do a quick lower leg service on it, but that's not what this video is about. What this video is about is showing you guys how to increase the travel on one of these forks, kind of the quick and easy way. I did a similar video on a Rockshox Recon, and probably the #1 comment was, can I do the same thing on a Judy? Well, I think so, and I think there's actually a quicker and easier way to do it than completely disassembling the lower legs. Quick disclaimer though, I'm just showing you guys how this process works. I'm not recommending that you do it. If you do it and you break your bike or you break your fork or you break yourself, I'm not responsible, that's on you. So now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at how this is done. Some of the things you'll need for this process: some 15 weight Rockshox suspension fluid, you will need some Sram Butter or similar suspension grease, you will need a 5 weight suspension fluid, you'll need an Allen wrench, I'm not sure what the size is, but you can probably figure that out, some isopropyl alcohol for cleaning, a socket wrench, and a 24 socket. But you need to make sure that you don't have one that has basically like a dishing on the inside of it, which most of them do. This one you can see I've ground down. You can also purchase ones that are specifically made for mountain bike forks. And then the last thing that you might need are some of these travel adjustment spacers. I'll leave a link to these and probably some of this other stuff in the description too. You may need these, you may not, depending on what travel you're coming from and what you're going to. All right, so before you do anything on suspension, you generally want to take the air out of it. So let's get the air cap off. You can use anything that's got a pretty small tip on there to just release the air. Be careful because, you know, some oil could shoot out if you're not careful, if your face is too close to it. So just keep that in mind. Helps to sometimes compress it as well, just to make sure you've got all of that air out of there. All right, this next part's probably gonna be hard to see, but the Allen wrench goes in here. There's a bolt that you have to loosen. It's usually not on too tight, and what you need to do is loosen it about 3 or 4 turns. You do not want to take it out completely because you need to get the one tool that I forgot to mention, which is a hammer. And then you want to have this pointed up a bit because once you release this, the fluid can come out. You probably want a catch pan underneath this as well when you tilt it forward. So go ahead and give it a few hits. All right, so once you know that that bolt has moved in, now you can just go ahead and take it the rest of the way out. Grab a bucket or a catch pan and then go ahead and drop it downward. It's not fully kind of released. Yeah, there we go. Now we got a little bit of fluid coming out. And I don't know if you guys can see this really, but that fluid coming out is brown. It looks like motor oil, and it would have been pink going in, so it's definitely due for a service. All right, so now we're back to where we started with the air fill cap area. Put this socket on here, crack it loose. That was extremely loose. I feel like I might have been able to do that with my fingers. All right, this is where the magic happens with these Judy forks and also the Recon. You will lift this out, and you've basically got all the inner parts of the fork here. So we'll take this over to the workbench and take a closer look at what's inside of here. So you want to have plenty of rags handy for this next part, but what you will do is just pop off this top cap, and then you can slide the rest of the parts out here. Okay. Well, I'll be honest with you guys, my plan of shortcutting this has run into a little bit of a snag, but I think we'll still be okay. There are pieces of this still inside the fork, and those are the ones that we're really concerned with when it comes to changing the travel. So maybe just by popping this upside down and get everything else out. So the top bumper just flew out. That's what would sit down here if you took this apart kind of the traditional method. But there is more to it than that. Well, unfortunately, the one piece that I'm really trying to get to is lodged in there really well. All right, it's a couple days later, and I finally figured out how to get this little travel spacer out. Took quite a few different attempts. So the first thing I did was I actually went ahead and dropped the lowers off. So what's different on the Judy than on the Recon is the clip at the bottom that holds the air spring in. It might be a little bit hard to tell on video here, but it's a plastic clip with a bunch of little teeth that engage in. And what I was reading about was a lot of times you break this when you try to get it off, and if you get a service kit, they should come with new ones. But I didn't really want to take the chance of breaking that, so I went back to trying to fish it out from in here. So the first thing that I thought of was, all right, maybe some sort of long extension can go in there and hook onto this thing and pull it out. And a 1/2-inch socket extension, you would think, I mean, it fits on there relatively snug, and I thought if I could get it on there, pull it out. Well, whatever was holding it on the inside, every time I would just pull it and the socket extension would come back out. So after a bit more thinking, what I did was I took some hockey tape, although I'm sure you could use Gorilla Tape or duct tape or something like that, and I wrapped it around the socket extension, to kind of build it up the diameter of it so it's harder to fit in. But then after wrapping it once or twice around, I flipped it over and wrapped it again so that the sticky part is actually sticking outward. And then once I was able to do that, forcing it into the fork, I had to really push it into this spacer to get it in there. And at that point, I was able to just kind of wiggle it around, kind of put some sideways pressure on it as I pulled it out. And finally, this did come out. So the good news is my shortcut method, although a bit of a pain trying to get this out, is doable, and you don't have to pull the lowers like I did. So the deal with these spacers are basically they kind of are bumpers at the bottom of the air spring that limit how far the shaft can go out, which then determines how much travel it has. So this started out with 100 millimeters of travel. It's got this sort of 2-in-1 travel spacer on it. So each one of those is 10 millimeters. If you get this kit that I mentioned earlier, it comes with a couple different sizes. And basically, the smaller the spacer, the more travel you're going to have. So this is one single 10 millimeter spacer, which means putting this in would take the travel from 100 millimeters to 110. For example, if you just didn't put any in at all, then you'd be at 120 because you're taking the 20 millimeter out and replacing it with nothing. Now, I wasn't actually planning on reducing the travel. I just wanted to do this video to show you guys how the process goes. But since I've invested this much time into it and fighting to get this thing out, I think I will go ahead and just put this 10 millimeter back in, and I'll have a 110 millimeter travel fork. I think going on that Talon, that'll still be pretty good. It'll raise the front end a little bit, which might be nice. So when it comes to putting all this stuff back together, you do just want to make sure everything is clean. All right, so this is where the grease comes in. You just want a light layer of grease on everything that you're putting back together here. Don't go crazy with it. So we're going to go in first with our bumper type piece. And that, I think, maybe will have a little bit of grease on the inner edges of it. Now keep in mind there's also going to be the oil that we inject in later, all getting mixed around in here. All right, so now the 10 millimeter travel spacer, a little bit of grease on it. Pop that on. A little bit of grease on the outside of everything. Like I said, we don't have to go too crazy with it. And they do recommend also that you put some grease on the ends of this. So now this can be slid up into here a bit. A little bit of grease around this top cap as well, especially around that O-ring. That's what's actually going to cause the air seal. So we want to make sure that, there's no air gaps or anything like that. A little bit up top as well. There's another O-ring up there. All right, and this is where the 5-weight suspension fluid comes in. We're going to put 2 cc's or 2 milliliters into this tube before this top cap goes on. And you would want some sort of syringe to do this with. All right, top cap can just pop on, just pressure fit. And what I'm going to do off camera, I'm going to put the lowers back on, back to the point where if I had just not taken them off in the first place, and then we'll go over the last couple steps in putting this back together. Okay, so now I'm going to put a little bit of grease on this shaft here before this goes back in the fork. I did make sure that it wasn't all the way extended. I pushed it in a little bit before this cap went on because I don't want it kind of at full extension when it's trying to go back in, because we need some space in the next step to put the oil in the lowers. So now this can just kind of drop on in there, and the grease that's on there should keep that travel spacer and the other top out bumper where they need to be. All right, that was a little bit tricky getting that shaft lined up, but now it's where it needs to be. Get this threading on. Obviously this is something you want to start by hand because they are very small threads. The last thing you want to do is cross thread this. Now if you recall when I took this off, I think I commented how it really wasn't on there that tight. So you probably don't need to over tighten this thing. I'm going to say that's good. For this last step, you want the bottom of the fork at a slight upward angle, and we need 10 cc's or 10 millimeters of that Rockshox 15 weight fluid to go in this side. And before this goes in, you do want to make sure that there is space between the opening and then where that shaft has come in. Right now they're touching, so I'm just going to push it back a little bit. It's easy to do because there's no pressure or anything in there. Then we can take a look in there and just ensure that it actually went in and didn't kind of backflow and come back out. And then finally this bolt can go back in. There is a crush washer on there. You'll see a washer and then a black plastic crush washer. Every time you take these off, you are supposed to replace that crush washer, but I don't have one. I think it'll probably be okay for a second time using it. So I'm pushing back just to remove that gap. And then that threads right on. Well, I am definitely not one to try to hide my mistakes. I had actually put these lowers on the wrong orientation, so I've now taken them back apart. So you might have noticed that when I was doing it the first time. Basically, the quick release dropouts would have been on the bottom. Everything was just backwards. But so if you're following this process and you're not dropping the lowers, you won't have to worry about doing that. So anyway, I have done that off camera and put it back how it's supposed to be. All right, so after a quick wipe down to get the grease and the oil off the outside of this fork, because, well, you want the new grease and the oil on the inside, you don't want it on the outside. It's just going to get things grimed up and gunked up sooner. So it's wiped down. The only thing left to do now is to add some air, and then you can get back to riding. You can do this process while the fork is on the bike. You don't have to take it off. And I would say if you don't bumble around as much as I did, you can get it done in under an hour. Well, I hope you got something useful out of this video and also enjoyed watching it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and think about subscribing to this channel. I do want to reiterate again, if you're doing this to your own fork, you're doing it at your own risk. And if you do want to see what this process looks like on a Recon, I do have a separate video for that, so I'll leave a card for that at the end of this video. Well, I'm going to go ahead and air this thing up. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you have a great day, and I hope to see you next time.